All right, hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Origins of Today podcast. This is our last episode in our series of Which Side Was Right, and this episode is going to be about the American Civil War. So I know I have said this for every single episode. I know for a fact this one is going to be the most controversial out of all of them. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to hear my whole argument. Then you can debate me in the comments and say everything, but I just want you guys to know this is my objective take. I had to reject all my biases and read objective sources and put aside pretty much all my previous opinions about this topic. So this is going to be my way to tell both sides of the story and to hear out both sides. And like I said, I think it's going to be a little bit controversial, but I just want you guys to hear me out first. So that's my little, there's a little warning before we go into this episode. But yeah, we're going to go into the intro right after this, and then after that, get straight into the video. I really hope you guys enjoy it. I know I enjoyed researching this and writing it. So yeah, hope you guys have a great time. Let's get straight into the intro. All right, so this one's going to be a bit different than the previous episodes, but it's still going to be the same in the sense that we're only comparing the reasons that each side went to war. So there's going to be more points for and against each side, but we are only comparing the reasons that each side went to war. So that is kind of the preface for how we're going to do it. It's obviously a little bit weird because there's only two nations, but that is generally how we're going to do it. But before we even get into that, I'm going to talk about why the war even started. So this is a topic of much debate. There are people on both sides who say it was about states' rights, it was about slavery. You know what? It's about both. And I'm going to explain that. So there are really many reasons for this war: states' rights, federalism, and obviously a lot of attention is on slavery. So first off, I'm going to be talking about states' rights. So honestly, to understand where all this comes from, you have to understand the state of the political state before this war even started. You had your Democrats, your Southern Democrats, and your Northern Democrats, and you had your Northern Republicans, and they were going at it about states' rights, federalism. How much power does a state have? One of the North Carolina senators, he said it was his idea that a state could nullify any federal law that they didn't like, that they felt wasn't really, it didn't apply to their state or shouldn't apply to their state. So obviously, I think that's a little bit absurd that we have a centralized government for a reason, but obviously states should have their own power too. But that was part of the argument that was going on. And it got very heated because people were very connected to their states. It's like a mini country inside of a country. I mean, that is how federalism is supposed to work. So really, what ended up happening is this war was a violent escalation of a political contest. So these guys, they were just going at it. And I mean, there was some dude got caned. Some guy brought a cane and caned another guy in the house, I think the House chamber. Just absurd. Really, in the end, something I really want to state about this war, and I'll try to say as much as I can, the people who suffered in this war were the common folk. This war was a politician's war. It was good that we fought it. Well, not for the loss of life, obviously, but it's good that we fought it to settle a lot of these ideas, settle a lot of these controversies. But this was a escalation of a political conflict, 100%. So, main thing at the beginning was states' rights. So people are going to be like, how dare you say this Civil War was only about states' rights? It wasn't only about states' rights. I'm going to get into that. So, really, like I said, so South Carolina senator. So basically they argued that any state could protect its interests by nullifying any act by the federal government that they considered unconstitutional or oppressive. So this is federalism, this is states' rights. That's the main thing that they're arguing about right now. And in the end, that is the main thing that they ended up going to war over. Of course, they were also very divided on the issue of slavery and the compromise. Like, big issue. But the main issue, especially in the initial split, was because of this issue of states' rights and this big controversy that they were having in like I said, it escalated to violence in the Senate chambers. That's insane. That shouldn't be happening, obviously. But it does go to show the violence and the connection people had to their states and the connection people had to the federal government, to where this argument escalated beyond just simple conversation to actual violence. We can even see this in during the war, and I know it's not really about during the war, but it makes sense. You'll see. So to the north, the government seemed to be fighting for a bit of an abstraction. To lose so many young men simply to uphold the status quo or to put down the rebellion was not enough, obviously. The Union's cause was not broad enough, so the Emancipation Proclamation was declared. So Abraham Lincoln, at this point, he needed to get the support of the European nations. If you guys don't know much about what's happening at this point, the Confederacy was trying to get the England and France on their side and hoping to gain legitimacy so that they could become their own nation. And in the end, England and France said no way. But part of the reason that they said no was because of this Emancipation Proclamation. Obviously, at this point, England was a free nation. They'd freed all their slaves. And when Abraham Lincoln issued this after the Battle of Antietam, that was a bit of a turning point there. But on top of foreign involvement, it also helped the American people to give them a cause to fight for. They fought to free the slaves, to stop this evil practice of slavery. So it gave the North, the Union, something to fight for. Now, this was not an original issue. As I said, this was after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. So regardless, yes, it was a issue. It didn't become a major or a pivotal issue until the Emancipation Proclamation. So that is my theory. I just want to settle that a little bit once and for all. Make the case that it is more than slavery that was an issue during this war. And actually, in the beginning, it was merely states' rights. Then it escalated to more issues, such as slavery. So just want to clear that up. We're going to get into the South and North, what's for and against them joining the war and starting this war. Okay, so the first side that the side that we're going to start out with is the North. So I'm going to talk about things that are for them joining the war and things that are against them joining the war. So reasonings that they had, even part of their cause that was wrong or flawed. So getting into the North. So first off, a major case that's always been made for the North is you can't just let a state in the Union secede because it sets a bad precedent. This is obvious. Obviously, the North couldn't just let South Carolina secede. That's absurd to just think that they were just going to let them do that. So I think this is actually a really good case for the North, is regardless of the issues going on, regardless of political issues, the Union had to remain complete. That was the part of the job of the federal government. So to even go to war because of this rebellion, it automatically justifies the North. Now, we haven't stated the other reasons for it, but I do really feel like this makes a solid case or a solid basis for the case for the North. And also, there is the issue of slavery. So, like I said, it was still a bit of an issue during the beginning of the war. And it wasn't a major issue, it wasn't the pivotal issue at the beginning, but it was still an issue. So part of that is that an economy that is built on slavery is obsolete and immoral, and most of the North saw it that way. So obviously, beyond it being very, very obviously immoral. Obviously, slavery is immoral. Okay, everyone knows that. Now, even though that is true, it is also at this point in time, it was an incredibly obsolete form of economy. A slavery-based economy was tended to be very stagnant. It wasn't very productive. Industrial economies were that's part of the reason the North even won, is because they had this big industrial base, whereas the South had none, really, at all. So this is also true, and I think the North was genuinely wanting to improve the South and to obviously get rid of this immoral action, but also to kind of improve this obsolete way of life. Now, to be fair, I don't think it's a reason to go to war, and I don't think that is really why they went to war, but I do think that's another point on the North side. Now, of course, we have to get into things that are against them. So first, I'm going to start off with a quote from a book I was reading. They were writing about slavery and the issues with Northern abolitionists. And now, hear me out. Like I said, I told you this is going to get a little bit controversial. I want you to hear me out. All right. But if slavery paid, it left men with uneasy consciences. Like in the North, where a man who demanded abolition could comfort himself with the realization that the financial loss would fall on someone else, his neighbor to the South. Now, of course, we should never only consider financial issues when it comes to things that are so moral, but it does provide a very good point. Someone in the North who is so completely away from this way of life in the South, of course they would be like, well, just get rid of your slaves. Obviously, I shouldn't keep having to preface this, but I know there's going to be people in the comments. Obviously, slavery is immoral. All right, that's not what I'm saying. But to have someone in the North who has no knowledge about the way of life in the South, they have no knowledge of how the South functions, and on top of it, if the South did get rid of their slaves, there would be mass financial. I mean, it's very similar to what happened during Reconstruction after the Civil War. And it would be very bad if all that suddenly happened. Now, the question of whether the moral cost would outweigh the financial cost or loss of life due to famine is not the issue. The issue is that the North, instead of asking the South about it, they were telling the South about it, which is obviously very unfortunate. So people calling for abolition were pretty much just screaming at the South, and rightly so. Obviously, it's very immoral. And they had no actual plan to do it without collapsing the Southern economy. So that caused the Southerners to close ranks. So they're like, these northern hipsters, I don't know, they don't understand our way of life. They don't understand what would happen if we got rid of all of our slaves. Our economy would collapse. And so I think that is a point against the North. Now, to be fair, I think the abolitionists were in the right. Slavery is immoral. Slavery is evil. But I think there should have been a better plan there. And I think part of the reason this war happened is the fault of the North, because the North kept just attacking the South with stuff like this. And especially, I mean, we'll talk later about John Brown and all about that when we get to the South. But the North also contributed to this war in causing the Southerners to close ranks, and it created a barrier. It created a separation rather than reaching across the table and saying, hey, let's talk about this. Instead, they decided to just scream at them and not really have a solution. Now, of course, in the end, the North, I would say the North is more justified morally, 100%, because of the issue of slavery. And like I said, it's not even the most major issue. But I also think the North is correct here because they can't really let a state secede just like that. So really, I would say the North is justified in their war against the South. When the South rebelled, I'd say they're justified. Okay, now we're going to get into the South. So let's talk about some of the reasons that's for the South. Now, obviously, I'm going to keep prefacing this throughout the video because I know there's going to be people who try to clip me, who try to yell at me in the comments, okay? Slavery is evil. The South participated in slavery. That was evil. That was immoral. I 100% agree. All right, moving on. So, I think it's important when we're talking about things that are for the South to remember this was just an escalation on all fronts. The South was getting very hyper nationalist, you could say. They were very very collected and they were prepared to defend their state, and in the end prepared to defend the South and their way of life. Same thing, not quite the same thing with the North. So that's some place where the North and the South are very different. And it's always something to remember. It was very polarizing. Now, for when we're talking about things that are for the South, I'm going to really only have a couple points here. One of them is John Brown. So John Brown, he basically raised an insurrection. He was this abolitionist, and he went down to the South, and he was trying to raise this army of slaves. And he brought a bunch of guns. He had a bunch of, and none of the slaves really appeared and came. There were a couple, and in the end, they sent in the Marines and killed him because he was staging an insurrection. But for the South, obviously this happened in the South where all the slaves were. For the South, this was a threat. This was very threatening to them. You know, they're kind of isolated. They live down there. They don't really have much interaction with people from the North. So after John Brown attempted this insurrection, the South kind of believed that that's what the North wanted, was a violent pillage through the South. So in a way, you can kind of understand where they're coming from. They see, like we said about the North, they see these abolitionists, and these abolitionists are calling them immoral. They're screaming at them, and these abolitionists don't have a solution for this issue of slavery, and they're not providing a way that the South could economically recover from it. Also, you see John Brown raiding his way through the South, trying to raise a slave army. Of course, the Southerners didn't take that very well, you know? Yeah, there are this all just goes to show that there are better ways to solve disagreements. There are better ways than simply yelling at people, calling them names, virtue signaling. There's this thing called a conversation, right? Conversations are great. It helps me talk about my ideas, and I can talk to you about your ideas. Then we can debate about them. We can talk about what things we have in common. Like, this whole entire war, the more you dig into it, the more you dig into the political reasoning behind it, it just is so absurd. It is a political war that spilled out into a actual physical war. And it's so sad because so many people died. This is the bloodiest war in American history. And it's really, really unfortunate that it came to this. And I don't think it should have, from what I see. Now, obviously, against the South is the inhumanity of slavery. Slavery is very evil, and the South participated in it. They defended it. They defended their way of life, which involves slavery, and that is 100% against the South. Now, I've stated the North and the South. I said the North was justified. Now I'm prepared to be absolutely attacked from all sides. The South was justified in their war. The South was justified in protecting their way of life. Whether or not their way of life was immoral, which I think the slavery bit of it was, is relevant. That's not part of the question. The question was, are they right in going to war to protect their way of life? And I say yes. Yes, they sensed a threat from the North. They sensed a people who had no sympathy with them, a people who had no similarities with them, and they saw a threat there. They saw these people, and they did not see them as countrymen. They saw them as a threat, like I've said. So I think the South is justified. I think the North is justified. And it's very interesting. You can see even leading up to the war, neither side thought the other was actually going to go to war. They never thought that the other side was actually going to go to war. And in the end, they both did. And that's the sad thing, is neither side really wanted this war. Especially the common folk. They did not want this war, but they got it, regardless of whether they wanted it or not. And that is really the sad thing about this war. The people who really lost this war were the common folk, especially the common folk in the South, with obviously the Reconstruction, how that failed. But really, this was a sad war, and the fact that it ever had to happen is very disappointing. But yeah, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you disagreed with anything I said, and I'm sure so many of you guys disagree with what I said, tell me in the comments. I would love to talk with you guys. I'd love to debate and hear out your side. That is really the most important thing. So yeah, great episode. I loved doing this series. Which Side Was Right was so fun. I might do it again. Who knows? Because that was so much fun. Now, there is a project I've been working on for this channel. So obviously this series is done. I might see about more series, but there's a project I've been working on for this channel. You will see what it is when it comes out. I don't want to spoil it, but I am very, very excited. Needless to say, you'll get to see what the American people really think in the most candid way. That will be the plan for the rest of this channel, and I'm so excited to show you guys it. I really am so excited. So keep an eye out. Remember what I said, you'll get to see what the American people really think. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you guys have a great day, and God bless.